Welcome back to StoryToob, everybody. We are here again with a recommendations video, and this time we wanted to focus on books that have a strong narrative voice, which is probably one of my favorite things and one of the easiest ways to hook me on a book. So what we mean and what we've thought of as strong narrative voice is specifically books where the narrator has a specific voice, where the tone is very easy to pinpoint, and it's usually evident from the first paragraph on the first page immediately when you open the book, and very recognizable. Books with a strong sense of personality. Now, this can mean any type of voice and personality, so obviously we're going to show books that we have read and liked, so this is narrative voice that is to our taste, but we've tried to keep it as diverse as possible, as we usually try to do with these lists.
I've just noticed that looking at our stacks that we have here, that we've actually chosen quite a number of books that are written in first person.
I do think first person lends itself very well to this, because often a strong narrative voice comes from the fact that you're in somebody's head and that character is quirky in some way or very particular, and the author is playing with that and really heightening it and leaning into that character. But it doesn't have to be first person.
Like in all the other recommendations videos we've been doing, grouping them by theme, all of these books, like you said, we'll try to keep it diverse, and they're all quite different from each other, but they all share that one quality that we enjoy in our books, which is that strong narrative voice and sense of character.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. So essentially, if you're ever in the mood, you find yourself in the mood for a book that might intrigue you with a very strong personality from the very beginning, not in any particular genre or type of book or type of story, here are some recommendations for you.
First one I'll mention, because we arrived into the sci-fi fantasy corner of BookTube, and the algorithm still doesn't know where to put us, I'm going to give you a sci-fi book, one of my favorites, that I think works mainly for me because of its narrative voice, and that's Dogs of War by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is written from the perspective of a big humanoid dog soldier called Rex. My name is Rex. I am a good dog. That's the first line of this book, and that is setting the tone of the narration, the first person narration of this book. Now, this book is a little bit of social commentary, a little bit of political commentary about mercenary, black ops, warfare, this kind of thing, sort of clandestine war crimes. But this is set in the future, and the idea that Adrian Tchaikovsky has here is that in the future there could be potentially bioforms, enhanced animals that are used for this sort of dirty work in warfare, and they are controlled, manipulated, they have masters. There's a bit of, master-slave type of relationship between the bioforms and their human handlers. Adrian Tchaikovsky deals a lot as well with messing with nature and biology, and kind of fucking with the rules of Mother Nature and the way humans try to play God with Mother Nature, and kind of cautionary tales against that. So obviously this is quite a fantastical book, and the odds of us ever meeting a 7-foot tall talking dog that might shoot you in the face is pretty slim, but it's a cool idea.
You never know.
It makes for a very strong narrative voice. And Rex and his crew of other bioforms, there is a bear called Honey, there is an alligator, don't remember his name, and there's also a swarm of bees called Bees. And they get sent on missions in, wherever, South America, Southeast Asia, these kinds of places. And slowly but surely, they start to loosen the grip of the sort of chips in their heads and the grip that their handlers have on them, and they start to develop a real conscience, and they start learning, and they start kind of evolving. And Rex's voice also evolves throughout the book from very simplistic, I am a good boy, I do what master says. We are now going to this little cabin in the desert, and we have been told to shoot the bad people. That kind of narration evolves gradually to become more sophisticated as the book goes on, and Rex himself becomes more self-aware, more self-conscious, and begins to question what it is he's being told, forced to do. And I just really like how that voice plays out in this book. It's one of my favorite science fiction books. It's also a very, very quick read. It's about 400 pages, but I think I read this book in a day. And yeah, very, very immersive and immediately engaging. So that kind of first-person voice, maybe it'll be a little jarring to you if you're not really into first person, if you like a sort of, step back third person. But this one really sucks you in and is immediately gripping.
The first book that I'm going to mention is quite different, and it is a book that we've talked about on the channel before. We have a review up that we'll link in the description, and that is Pop 1280 by Jim Thompson. This is a classic of crime fiction, and it is also in first person, and we follow Nick, who is the sheriff in a small town in the early 1900s, 1910s maybe. He presents himself as this bumbling, a little bit stupid, kind of naive individual who is easy to manipulate, and he kind of encourages manipulation in that way. And that is what the narration is like. It's what his dialogue is like, but it's also what his internal dialogue is like, and how he's describing the world around him. And that may or may not change throughout the book as we discover more about who he really is. And that's all I'll say about that. It's a fabulous little book. It's really short as well. And this close following of a person who isn't entirely what they present themselves to be makes it for a very engaging read, because you immediately just want to know what is actually going on and where we're going with this whole thing. So quite a dark one, a very different sort of like narrative voice, but a great one, especially because it's playing with ambiguity and manipulation.
Next one I'll recommend is probably one of the best narrative voices I've ever read, and one of the books that is probably closest to my heart, and that is A Star Called Henry by Roddy Doyle. The main character here is Henry Smart. This is another book written in first person. This follows young Henry Smart, a young fella from Dublin in the early 1900s, which, if you know anything about Irish history, is a wonderfully interesting time to have grown up, especially in Dublin. He gets involved in the 1916 Easter Rising when the Irish rebelled against the British Empire for the umpteenth time, but this one got them close in the end. And then obviously the ensuing War of Independence in 1919 to 1921, taking us kind of to the cusp and just about to the Civil War in 1922. So the first 20 years of the 20th century chronicles this sort of coming of age story of young fella Henry Smart in the slums of Dublin, poverty stricken Dublin at the time, under the thumb of the British Empire. And Henry Smart is a fucking smart arse, and he is a bit of a scoundrel, a little bit of a womanizer. Well, not so much. He kind of sets his eyes on one woman in the book, and that's the girl that he's going to get, and of course he's going to get the girl. But he's a bit of a scoundrel, a bit of an Indiana Jones, charismatic, smart guy. There is more than a little bit of on-the-nose, tongue-in-cheek play going on here from Roddy Doyle. makes him one of my favourite writers, of course, that sense of humour. But the dialogue here is also very, very, very Dublin. And yeah, it's probably the best story that I've read, the best narrative that I've read from Roddy Doyle, who is typically quite an author very focused on the language and the dialogue. And that is what his books are, essentially a snapshot of a time in a character's life. This is going full on historical fiction, and it's more of let me tell you, a grand tale of this one person's life. It's technically the first in a trilogy. It can be read as a standalone. I've also heard very horrendous things about the second book in the trilogy. Some people even skip it and read the third one, but I've just read this one, and I love this one. Many people kind of agree that the first book is the best one, and then he just decided to write two more, see where Henry Smart is in the 50s and 60s. A less interesting time in Irish history, to be honest, but this one is fantastic. And if you want to just learn anything about how Irish people speak, read this one.
Next up is the only third person book on this list, and that is Savages by Dawn Winslow. Now, if you watch this channel at all, you're probably thinking, of course Yolanda has picked a Dawn Winslow book. Does this actually fit the category, or are you just trying to put a Dawn Winslow book in every single video that you make? Well, it can be both. This book definitely fits the narrative voice category. It's the kind of book that you either vibe with what he's going for tonally or you don't, and you will know in a very short space of time. So I would say if you come across this book in a bookshop, just pick it up, read the first chapter. It's 2 words, and if that makes you chuckle, keep going, read the first 3, 4, 5 pages, and if you like it, you're going to like the book. And if it makes you roll your eyes, it's probably not for you. So it really fits this.
Maybe read the first 2 chapters.
This is a hyper stylized, dialed to 11, violent, in some ways cool, but in a way that you might think is cringy if you don't vibe with it, tale of drug cartels and violence and sex and extortion and money and how people deal with all of these things. So I think if you bounce off it, you bounce off it really quickly. He's really dialing everything up to 11 here. Very, very short chapters, short sentences. Sometimes it randomly goes into being written like a script for like half a page for no discernible reason. One of the chapters is just a list of shops in a shopping centre, in a mall, that one of the main characters goes to. She calls her mother passive-aggressive Queen of the Universe, Paku for short, and we just know this character as Paku throughout the entire book. So that just to give you a sense of how this is written. It's extremely foul language, like I said, very violent, and not shying away from that violence or flinching away at all. Quite the opposite. And it's about 3 young people who deal drugs and in California until the cartels get involved and want a cut of their business. Chaos ensues. It's very funny. I find it very funny. I love this book, but like I said, it's a very all or nothing kind of thing. I think you'll either love it immediately or know pretty quickly that it's not for you. So that's Savages.
Next one I'll recommend is another one of my favourite books and another one of my favourite narrative voices that I've ever read. Obviously, that's why it's on this list. That is Gail Honeyman's Elellanar Elephant is completely fine. Spoilers, she's not fine.
It's an elephant.
Still really waiting for Gail Honeyman to write a second book. This is her debut novel. And on our copy, it says 2 million copies sold. I think it's more like 3 or 4 now. The last time I looked at the book in the shop, it changed this. Anyway, this is just one of those bestsellers that deserved its status and its acclaim and its popularity. Quite a popular book and has inspired several attempts at sort of copycat, or certainly has had an influence on certain types of contemporary fiction. At the moment, you can kind of see it now when you go into the bookshop. There's a few trying to be something like this book. What is it? It's about a quirky lady called Elellanar Elephant.
It's an elephant.
Who I'm willing to bet my life savings is autistic. It's never explicitly said. But she is slightly reclusive. She's socially awkward. She has a very mundane, boring job that she takes quite seriously. And even the mundane, small things of that job she takes quite seriously and is very proper and doesn't understand why everybody else is just not so focused on sending the right word in the right email at all times. This is set in Glasgow, so it's quite a Scottish sense of humour, something that vibes with me. We share a sense of humour with the Scots. It's very heartwarming. This is a very heartwarming book, but it is not without its darkness, but it's extremely funny. And above all, it's just kind of one of the funniest books I've ever read. Now, that humour does cover a layer of darkness, like I said, and once the book taps into that, Eleanor goes on this kind of existentialist journey of dealing with her past and why she might be the way she is and why she pulls herself away from people and forming connections and relationships. And when her walls kind of start to come down, when she starts to focus on herself and realize that she's not fine, she maybe starts to form some connections and sees the beauty in those little small moments of sharing something with another human being. I think this is a magical book. It is funny, it's sad, it's heartwarming. It's one of those bestsellers that might sound like, oh, is that a bit soppy? It's really not. It's done with a sense of humor and a sensibility that doesn't necessarily believe in all that fucking crap, but it wants to believe in it. So there's a sort of an irreverent sense of humor about it all, which means I kind of connected to it more than just sort of everything's rosy and peachy and, oh, if you just love other people, life will be better. It's it's a little more irreverent than that.
A little more real than that.
A little bit more real than that, but with that same level of optimism. And I think it's a wonderfully written book, and the narrative voice in it is just everything. I can't wait for Gail Honeyman to write another book. That is one book that I think I will pick up day one and actually read on day one. There are a lot of books that come out that I'm excited for and then I buy, and then I still, like, I'm not one to read new releases day one. But if she writes another book, I'll absolutely be there day one. This is one of my favorite books. Yeah.
Same.
There you go.
Next up, we couldn't really not include any comics on this list. And the one that had to make it is Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. You might be aware of it if you're in the online sci-fi fantasy sphere. I feel like this one has made it into the mainstream a little bit more. It's an extremely popular comic.
Yeah. So
Brian K. Vaughan is the writer, Fiona Staples is the artist on it. And it's a space opera. And it's a very crazy, wild, colourful one that you might be fooled into thinking is for younger audiences because of it, but it is absolutely not. It's quite graphic in its sexual content and in violent content and like themes and everything. So this is very much an adult comic.
I think similar to Elellanar Elephant, it's quite irreverent about all of its themes.
Yes, and I tend to find those more impactful. One of my favourite, I don't know if you can call it a genre, is like the dramedy, where we're dealing with really serious themes through humor, and then when the rug is pulled out from under you, it just hits you that much harder.
Yeah.
And Elellanar Elephant is very, very much like that, and Saga has an element of that too. And the reason that we've selected it for the narrative voice list It's a little bit difficult to put comics on it, I think, because a lot of it comes through dialogue. And when you actually have narration in that way, it's often very, very functional. Just something that needs to be there can't be in dialogue. But in Saga, we do actively have a narrator, and that is the main character, Hazel, who is a baby on this cover. But the narrator is her from the present or the future, depending on how you want to look at it, looking back and telling her life story. So sometimes you get some commentary from her. She won't spoil things, but she'll give you a hint of like, oh, how she looks back on it. So we have her voice as a child growing up and comes out in her dialogue and what she's experiencing. And then we have her voice as an adult kind of narrating the whole thing.
She'll give you little hints of where things might be going, but she'll be like, but it's not time to tell you that bit of the story yet. And she'll continue on.
Yeah, she's a bit of a tease without ever giving anything away. And the whole tone of the comic is just quite magical because of what we just mentioned, this like balance between humor and absolute insane silliness, but with a very serious approach to its themes underneath, and very human in a world filled with robot people that have TVs for heads and like giant spider creatures and things like that. But don't be fooled by its craziness. It is at its core a serious story, just with a lot of window dressing and luring you in with this sense of levity.
When I was talking about Elellanar Elephant, I said that it kind of spawned some attempted copycats, or certainly had an influence on certain narrative voices in other works of contemporary fiction. And the next one that I'm going to mention is one of those books that was influenced by that, but it's slightly different. It goes off and it veers in a different direction. Another Irish author. Yup, the lads. This is Strange Sally Diamond by Liz Nugent. And Strange Sally Diamond is another strange character. A woman who shares a tiny bedroom with her siblings and perhaps lives with an abusive father in a very closed off, sheltered from the world, not really allowed to go outside family environment. Very abusive father. And the narrative voice in this is extremely strong and present. Obviously, title of the book says that Sally Diamond is pretty strange. We learn why she's strange, and we learn it pretty quickly. But her narration, Liz Nugent's writing, is extremely engaging and compelling. And you may think, if you read Elellanar Elephant and then immediately read Strange Sally Diamond, you might just think, oh, I'm kind of reading the same book. Be patient, it will go in a different direction, and then follow it in that direction. It gets, I would say, certainly darker than Elellanar Elephant. Still got some humour, but it's more on the dark side.
Yeah, I think Elellanar Elephant is more hopeful as a book.
Charming,
even though initially like the tone is similar of the writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Liz Nugent is a author of contemporary fiction and thrillers. Very popular nowadays. Her books seem to be all kind of different in tone. So she could be a writer to check out as well if you like this one. Just a little plug for a contemporary Irish author. So there you go. There's Strange Sally Diamond.
Next up is a book that I feel like I don't need to talk too much about because we have once again mentioned it a couple of times on the channel, but that is James by Percival Everett.
Go on, Percy.
Go on, Percy. You read that earlier this year, made a video. Again, we'll link that in the description. And I picked it up recently and read it as well. And this is a great book. It was shortlisted for the Booker last year. If you haven't heard about it, it's a retelling of Huckleberry Finn from the perspective of Jim the slave. And I've read 2 Percival Everetts. You've read many. And he is very good at narrative voice, I think. He can dial it up or down depending on what kind of story he's telling and what effect he wants to achieve. The other book by him that I read is The Trees, which is very satirical. And this one is a bit more subtle, But the reason I think the narrative voice is so good here and so effective is that we have a little bit like with Pop 1280, even though it's a different type of character, we have a dissonance between the voice of the character and how he speaks to other people and his internal monologue and how he is to himself or with people that he trusts. So a big theme of this book, I would say it's almost the main theme of this book, is language and the power of literacy and language and education and how you can use it as a tool, both to disguise yourself, to fit in, but also to understand and fight back if you have to. So Jim essentially speaks the way white people would expect a slave to speak when he's in public, but then privately with his family, he is quite a well-spoken, literate, educated person who has taught himself to read.
Like I said, publicly, Jim talks the way white people expect Jim to talk, but privately, in internal monologue and to his family, James is very well spoken. It's also about the power of choosing your name and what you want to be known by.
Yeah, that's a through line in the book. Like, the power that you have to make your own choices, no matter how small the choices that you're allowed to make are, it's still important that you do make them. It's a great book, and like I said, a bit more subtle in terms of this strong narrative voice than a lot of the books that we have on this list, where it's really like you read half a page and you're like, yes, I get what the tone of this book is. The strength of this one is really in this balance and going back and forth between how it's safe to present yourself, how it's safe for him to present himself in the world, and depending on what situation he's in, versus who he is and who he wants to be, and finding that out. It's a great book. It's a really quick read, very, very engaging, and I cannot recommend it enough. You also don't have to have read Huckleberry Finn or like Mark Twain. I haven't either.
Yeah. Last one I'll mention is actually, now that I'm noticing, kind of similar to the last two that I've mentioned. This is another Strange Lady book. And this is probably one of my favorite, I don't know if it was one of my favorite, but certainly one of the quirkiest reads I read last year, and that is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. This book is about a Polish lady living in the mountains, surrounded by idiots and men who don't know anything, and cruel men, and the odd kind one. And she is very into astrology, likes animals more than people. She's quite reclusive. She gives nicknames to everybody in the town because she couldn't be arsed learning their actual names. She doesn't like any of them. So she gives them very colourful nicknames based on little characteristics that she notices about each one. There's Bigfoot and stuff like that. And there is a murder in the little small village that she lives in. And the police come and talk to her and ask her questions. Did you see anything suspicious? And she doesn't want to answer anybody's questions because she doesn't care, and she's glad that the person's dead. This is also written in first person, so you're getting all of her thoughts about all of this that's going on, and it's just all the shenanigans happening in this little village. Everybody just leave me alone. And that guy that died was treating his dog badly anyway, so I don't care. And it's a very fun little quirky book, and it's kind of about how we dismiss the elderly as just the crazy lady down the street. Maybe there's just more going on, and maybe there's a little more beneath the surface, and obviously old people have brains. Silly us for not realizing that. And it is kind of about a forgotten subsection of people that are just sort of disregarded because they're at the end of their life. The crazy lady down the road has nothing important or valuable to say, and how these people kind of can find themselves screaming into the wind for somebody to listen. And Olga Tokarczuk
Tokakruk.
also kind of pairs that and mirrors that with how women are treated in Poland and in general in the world, to be honest. But she's specifically talking about Polish issues with misogyny. And kind of, yeah, so she couples that with also the elderly, treatment of the elderly, and especially in these sort of remote villages. It's a very good book. It's very quirky. The writing style is unique. It's gonna be unlike a lot of things you've read, but there's a lot of influence from certain things in there, like, you know, Agatha Christie murder mysteries and stuff, and it's a little bit of that, and sort of the vibe of it, the setup of it is like a very Agatha Christie. Ooh, it's in the snow, it's a cozy mountainside, it's all very cute and quaint, but it's kind of anything but. So, yeah, I think this is a really good book. I can tell why Olga won a Nobel Prize. There's just a lot of like little literary references here and there, little bits that she takes from certain styles and genres and kind of twists it and gives it this veneer of quaintness that is not that under the surface, and it kind of just reinforces what she's trying to say in the book. But it all comes out in the narrative voice. So I would recommend that. It's also a quick read. I read it quickly as well. So yeah, it's a very easy read. It's deceptively easy to read.
Last but not least is kind of an obvious one in terms of narrative voice for fantasy fans, and that is Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff.
That certainly has narrative voice.
Another one that really has a strong narrative voice in all of his books and likes playing with that. And he is hyper stylized. This book is really emo. And if you're not into that, once again, I think you'll bounce off it pretty quickly and know pretty immediately that it's not for you. And if it is, then you're in for a great time, because this is a really fun vampire book.
If you take everything very literally, it might anger you. If you have an Australian or UK, Ireland sense of humour, you might just have a good time with it.
It's a very cheeky book. It's not taking itself seriously at all, really. And like I said, it's just profoundly emo. I think...
It's unapologetically so.
Absolutely. I think the review that originally sold me on it was Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown.
All three books published by Simon & Schuster Saga Press.
Correct. Who described it as The Name of the Wind meets Interview with the Vampire, but it feels like at any time My Chemical Romance could burst out singing Helena. And I didn't like Interview with the Vampire, but I love the other two. So that sold me on it immediately, and I think it's pretty accurate. Bonus is that J. Kristoff is also really into The Vampire Diaries. So if you enjoy that show, there's a little nod hidden in Empire of the Vampire. That's all I'll really say about the narrative voice. It's emo as fuck and unapologetic in its use of language, in its use of the gothy kind of style and how it approaches vampires. But there's also just a really great story at the heart of it. So it had to have a place on this list.
It is true that it is just very Aussie.
It is.
That's all we got for you. Those are books with good narrative voice. If you've read any of them, let us know. If you have any recommendations for us, let us know in the comments. We'll be back with more of these videos with other themes. But if you have any questions that you would go into a bookshop and ask a bookseller, hey, give us a book with this specific element, put that down in the comments so we can think on it and recommend books based on those questions. We got the idea for this series, like we said before, based on questions that people would come in and ask in the bookshop that we used to work in. So stay tuned for more. Subscribe if this is the first time you found the channel. Like this video so that other people watch it, and do all of that other stuff, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.